The Vulnerable Hero podcast begins now. My brothers and sisters, hello, I am Mack, and welcome to another episode of The Vulnerable Hero, where I define vulnerability as having the courage to experience love in its purest form. Having the courage to experience love in its purest form. Today, I want to get on this topic of anxiety and depression. Anxiety and depression. I recently, as of a few days ago, posted a very honest and vulnerable post on Facebook and Instagram chronicling my journey over the past 2 years. 2 years ago, I was willing. Let me give you some background of me before I tell this. When I was 20 years old, I tried to kill myself. I attempted suicide. I took my seatbelt off. I floored it and tried to drive off a bridge. And a semi-truck driver cut me off, honked its horn, and in an instant of instinct, I swerved back into my lane. That moment of anticipating flying through the windshield and it all being over, and then not dying, led me on a incredibly intense, that's the word, intense path and search for truth, search for meaning, search for clarity, search for love. I searched for love. I went hard into Christianity. I went hard into religion. I went hard in the paint in business and career. I went hard. I was searching for truth. I was searching for love. But because I chose to never and literally never look back before that night in November when I was 20 years old, I just put a wall and said my life began from that moment I didn't die forward. And I would talk about it. This night I didn't die. I shared the story. In fact, the very first time I shared my suicide attempt was at Young Life, and this girl comes up bawling afterwards and said, I felt like coming here tonight before I was going to end my life. I felt like something was calling me to come here. I'll never forget this sweet girl named Rachel, and her tears are streaming down her face. I'm crying. I have seen immense power and love liberate so many souls over the years. However, I was not willing to look before that night. And so my life, I would claim, I really was born again, quote unquote, that night. And my life from 20 years old, all the way through being 36 years old was 16 years of striving so hard, building $1 million+ business, having employees, having an emotional affair with one of the employees, being broken and hurt and isolated. And my wife, who is amazing and incredible, because we're all human beings on our own journey, she had her walls up ever since I met her. And her walls was the wall of perfectionism. Her mask was perfectionism, which made me feel, and I thought she was perfect, which made me feel even more broken because I knew there was a deep secret that something inside me was off, was broken. I felt inescapably wrong that no matter what I did, I was not wired right. I was broken, and everything I did and touched always resulted in pain. I hurt a lot of people, my wife included. And my dog's in the office in the studio right now, so I don't know if you can hear him. But I hurt a lot of people, and I didn't want to hurt people. I tried my best. I read every book, every business book. I consumed books. I consumed knowledge. I read the Bible 7 times cover to cover, and not just in chronological order from Genesis to Revelation, reading that cover to cover in 14 years. I read it 7 times, but I read it also like all of Psalms twice a year, Proverbs every month. I never missed a morning or night of praying on my knees and striving. Now, you listening, you're like, whoa, that has nothing to do with me. I'm telling you how I express my outlet was this path. And I remember I consulted Microsoft, and I remember standing in a cafeteria at Microsoft, and tears are welting up in my eyes, and I'm surrounded by hundreds of people in this cafeteria, and I'm like, I don't belong here. And this wasn't the what's the book, The Big Leap? It's not the Facade Complex, or what's it called? I'm looking at my library. I forget what it's called, but there's something like Facade Complex, Inferiority Complex. Anyway, I'll think of it. It wasn't that I was faking it till I make it. I'm standing there thinking my brain is broken and it does not work like everyone else's in here, and I don't belong, and I've never felt like I belonged anywhere, and I don't belong here, and everyone else works and I don't work. And I remember calling my buddy, and I'm starting to get choked up in the cafeteria, trying not to cry, but I was so depressed and feeling so broken. And the thoughts of suicide never left me from 20 years old to being in that cafeteria at 36 years old. I'd already built $1 million+ business. My wife didn't have to work. I'm supporting 3 children. I have published a book. I've spoken all over the country. I've done amazing things on the outside. There was nothing that I could check off any longer. I had mastered Christianity. I could give you a dissertation of all the denominations and the origins and the paths and the teachings. I could look, I felt like I had checked every box off that I had ever looked at. And I'm standing in this cafeteria, tears welting up in my eyes, thinking I am broken, and I keep being broken, and I can't fix myself. And the only way to fix myself is finally to get out of myself. I get choked up right now because I know the pain that people feel. And it was in October 2.5 years ago that a Navy SEAL buddy of mine called me and told me about an emotional intelligence training program. And I am by myself at home. It's a Friday night. My wife was out of town. I don't even remember where she was. We were talking about it last night. She's like, where was I? I'm like, I don't remember. She's like, yeah, maybe at a concert. I don't know. But she was out of town, and I am laying on the couch, not even with the TV on, fighting to not kill myself. I am literally fighting to, I don't want to hurt my children. I don't want to hurt my wife, but I could not escape me. And other people didn't matter at that moment as much as me. And the pain and the confusion and the fear and the anxiety, the skin picking. I have constantly been picking my skin, biting my nails, tearing at myself. And I'd gone to therapy for 2 years every single week, sometimes twice a week, because of the craziness that I was experiencing. And let me just put some context to this story. It wasn't that I was just dealing with past pain, but I had an employee log into my as me in my iMessage and message a family member of mine who was in hiding to come out of hiding as me. And the way I found out is miraculous, and the craziness that ensued, but I have had a crazy story. And I blamed myself, and I blamed that something in me is broken. I cause all this stuff. The world is not safe. No one's safe. Everyone's trying to hurt me. I don't fit in. I can't protect myself. I can't protect my wife. I can't protect my children. And I'm laying on this couch on this Friday night in October of 2016, and my buddy calls me and tells me that he thought about me tonight. Like right when he called me. This is one of the toughest men this is a hero, a national hero that we'll never know the missions that he's done. He's medically retired because of the combat that he experienced. And he starts telling me, and I start bawling, and this man starts bawling. I've never heard this guy cry ever. And I certainly never cried with him, but he's telling me, and I'm like, what is this? My first thought was, is this a cult? I mean, how crazy is this? I've tried everything. I have done everything I could. But even when a new thing was presented to me, I was defensive, like, what, is this a cult? But I trusted him, and I was at my wit's end. I couldn't live like this any longer. I had 3 children. I had never been able to bathe them, which I could not even be in the bathroom with them. Because not what I thought what I would do to them, but what happened to me, and it triggered me. And what I would tell my wife since very first child, who was 5 years old at this time, my very first child, I would just say something happened to me in a shower, and she's like, hey, no problem. And I was dismissive, and we didn't go that deep in our marriage at the time. And it was just kind of like, hey, cool, I got it. And I'm like, I can't, why can't I bathe my kids? I'm broken. I can't, what is wrong with me? So all this is happening this October night when my buddy calls me and he tells me about it. And I talked to my wife. She finally came back, and then we got on a call with my buddy and his wife, and they had both gone through this, and they sounded different. They sounded here, if that makes any sense. They were grounded in, like, they were them talking to me, not the brokenness talking to my brokenness. It was really interesting. So I went down. But I went down with a secret that not any human being knew. Not my closest friends, not my wife, certainly not my wife. I went down to this emotional intelligence training. It was in January. I went. That if it didn't work, I would take my life. Because this was the last. This was it. This was the Alamo. This was the Alamo. I could not actually live in my body any longer with the brokenness, with the secrets, with the stuffed down emotion that kept coming out in unhealthy ways, with the judgment of others and the judgment of myself, with the brokenness, with the confusion, with the pain, with the longing for being loved and never feeling loved. So the secret was, if it didn't work, I would kill myself. On the outside, everything looked perfect. My family looked perfect. We have a friend who's an amazing photographer. Shout out to Mandy McMahon, an amazing photographer. She would take these photos of our family, and my wife, who's beautiful, my children who are beautiful, would smile. And that moment would be captured, and we'd post it. Not to try to fake anyone out, but like we are clinging to that image that we were putting out there. And everyone would see the image. But they had no idea what was going on internally. They had no idea the secrets. They had no idea the pain. They had no idea the nights I would be on the ground bawling my eyes out when I started having flashbacks of the abuse that I endured, and I'm rubbing the carpet and asking Lauren, my wife, am I here? Is this happening? Are you here? Like massive, intense trauma. And I go down to this thing. I don't know anyone. No one. It's down in San Diego. I know no one at all. But I made my buddy a promise. He said, whatever your natural inclination would be, do the opposite. And I love my buddy. I respect him as a hero. I respect him as a man. I respect him as a husband and a father. I just love him. And I looked at him. He made me promise. We FaceTimed. And he said, do the opposite of what you naturally would always do, because what you've always done has gotten you the results that you've always gotten. I'm like, that's logic. That makes complete sense. Growing up, I was a class clown. In fact, any teacher listening, I apologize to you. I've been kicked out of so many classes. I would hijack these classes from these teachers because the authority, if I felt threatened by them, I would subvert their authority and I would take over the classes. I was a class clown. I was a schemer. I was a scammer. I would hide. I learned very early on in my life to hide the truth, to hide the reality. I didn't want to get another bar of soap jammed in my mouth or beat with a belt or intimidated or thrown or threatened or hurt or scared So hey, I became really good at hiding. So I'd always sit in the back of the room. In college, I sat in the back of the room. I'd always keep my back to the door. I'd watch, or back to the wall. I mean, I would watch everyone. I was really good. I was like a deer in the wilderness. I joke around with friends back then. I'm like a deer in the woods. Like, do you hear that? And then everyone's like, no. I'm like, something changed. Something shifted. The energy shifted. So I go to this emotional intelligence program, and my natural inclination was not to speak, and I just fought it. I didn't care anymore. I'd rather die than live like I was living. So I popped up. They're like, does anyone want to share? And I'm like, I stood up, and I didn't even really know what I was going to share. I just was fighting the urge to do what I've always done. I really was committed to doing the opposite of what I've always done out of love for my friend and really the last ditch attempt to change my own life. And I first started to share I get choked up right now. Not being able to bathe my kids and barely being able to change their diapers and the guilt that caused, man. And it still hurts because I missed out on so much. And I shared that with this group. And people, instead of judging me, showed me love. And when I cried, they cried. And when I shared, they listened and didn't give me an answer, didn't give me the quick answer. They just listened. And it was the very first time in my life that I'd ever experienced what real love was. And real love is the absence of judgment. Is the absence of someone's opinion. Is the absence of an opposing force or energy. And I experienced real love for the very first time. And I shared and I continued to share. And there were moments where I wanted to share more, or I knew there was more, but I was afraid what it meant about me if I shared. And after the first weekend, there was 2 weekends of this workshop, I didn't want to go back. I was scared I was going to die. I had 3 nightmares that I was shot to death in my driveway by a family member. I was so afraid. And I told my buddy that, and I told this coach of mine, there was coaches of the small group, and she opened up and she talked about her father being murdered, and she understood, and I'm like, she opening up, becoming vulnerable, gave me the courage that I can keep going. And I went back, and I went harder the second weekend, and I shared something I had never shared before in my entire life out loud. And the moment I shared it, the moment I shared it, it was like I had experienced oxygen for the very first time in my entire life. That every second before that, it was like I was breathing water. And it wasn't until that moment, there was nothing else in me. I had shared about the pornography addiction, the masturbation, the struggles, I I shared. And the last thing that I was unwilling to share until I did was the first thing that caused my emotional freedom. And since that weekend, I have been on an immense journey. 2 years ago, little over 2 years ago, was when I graduated from that. And I am forever indebted and grateful to the people that run that. Brad and Jenna, Chris Lee, Michael Strasner, all the coaches and trainers that stood for me, that just loved me, that didn't present a heaven or a hell, a right or a wrong, sin or holiness, sanctification or transgressions, good or bad, just loved me. Just loved me. And I realized then, leaving that second weekend, that where love is present, where love is present, our truth will come forth. We'll feel safe enough to share our truth. And when we share our truth, then we will experience true, once and for all, personal freedom. And my journey didn't stop there. I'd already been in therapy for 2 years, but really that was the beginning of my journey. I mean, I grew up in a house that I was told that meditating was evil, that demons would possess me, that I'd become demon possessed, and their spirits and imagination was evil, and all the craziness. And I remember going down there the first time ever I did a guided meditation, I said out loud, "All right, Satan, possess me. Come on. I'm sick of this. Get it over with. If it's going to happen, seriously, if you're real, bring it." And nothing happened. And I'm like, wait a minute, nothing happened, but I kept experiencing love. I kept experiencing my own freedom. And I'm like, well, what is the religious community going to think? Oh, I'm become the opposite side. I'm like, but I am feeling free. And there was this confluence of what I was actually experiencing, my own healing, my own freedom, my own health, my own story, my own existence, apart from anyone else, and me realizing I will die someday with just me, my story, my body, my feeling, my experience, and my body, my experience, my story will leave an impact in the lives of others. My children, my wife, my children's children, and that legacy was shifting, changing in those moments. I knew I was going to leave a more positive legacy than I was going to leave prior. If I would have died in that moment, I would have left a legacy of pain and confusion and a lot of potential, a nice guy and beautiful family and smiles. And I just don't understand what caused it. We don't know why these people are committing suicide. It's because we keep putting them in these jail cells of image. But I changed and I started to realize I am here on this earth to go. I've gone through what I've gone through so that I can help others. I'll go into the darkness with you. I will stand there. I will not judge you. And we will look at the dirtiness, the ugliness, the fear, the terror, the confusion together. And realize that was not you. It was not me. And it never touched you, as it never touched me. The impacts of it created a lot of trauma in my body, but it never touched the real me. And this is bringing it full circle back to what I was talking about when I started this podcast: anxiety and depression. Anxiety and depression are symptoms. They are symptoms of not willing to go back to the source, back to the origin, back to the moments where you were exposed to all things as a child and someone inflicted pain in such a way that you closed off your openness. And from that moment forward, You were never free to be who you truly were meant to be in this world. And that butting up against itself, the you inside you and the wall to protect the you inside you and to keep you safe is at war. I can't tell you how many times I hear guys, I just don't open up, I'm private. You're dying. We will all die. None of us know the moment. Do not go to your grave claiming that you are a private person or you deal with things internally, because the impact of even not expressing the real you hurts others around you. And when you experience rejection, or when your spouse or your friends experience rejection, the next step from rejection is resentment. We have so much resentment and anger and vitriol. And it's time to heal. My brothers, listen to me. It is time to heal. It is time to drop your walls. It is time to stop protecting your innocent self, because you don't need to protect your innocent self anymore. You need to express your innocent self and look at the pain and trauma that was caused in your life. Whether you just weren't hugged enough, that could have been the most traumatic thing. You don't have to be beat, molested. You don't have to be coerced or whatever it was. You didn't have to be abused. Everyone's so afraid of that word abuse. And I've defined so many times on this podcast what the word abuse means. It means some person with power, authority, or the ability to inflict threat or intimidation or violence on someone who doesn't have power and authority. The parent-child dynamic is the first dynamic of abuse, because people with power and authority and have the ability to inflict that power and authority over a innocent life who doesn't have that power. That's where abuse first starts. And we don't like to call it abuse because no one wants to get honest with themselves, but they are dealing with depression, anxiety, suicide rates the highest it's ever been. 79% of all suicides in the United States are men. And so we get to this place where you and I get to choose. And how much are you worth giving up of your real self and the real legacy and the real life compared to protecting this facade that isn't the real you? Depression is not your issue. Anxiety is not your issue. Those are fruits of a tree that is rooted down deep to the pain. And until you are willing to look at it in the dark for what it really is, you will just keep treating the symptoms. But I want your freedom. Some of the men I work with, I want their freedom more than they want their freedom. And that doesn't work. You have to want your freedom. You have to want to change more than anything. Whether it be for changing so your children and your children's children have a legacy of a man who went through the hero's journey. Started here, opened up, broke down, went down, experienced adversity, understood, worked on himself, and came out the other side, the real person of who he was when he started. But you keeping the facade, the protection, the isolation, this is just how I am, and all the things, or you're perfect, or you don't want to admit anything you've ever done wrong, there is no hero's journey. That is a non-exciting, non-worth story to read. And I believe every person can be and is their own hero. You get to be your own hero in your story. You get to be the hero of your life. You get to liberate your own soul. And in liberating your own soul, be the permission for others to liberate their own souls. The days of isolation, facade, ego, mask, pretending are over. Are over. The time to heal for authenticity and honesty and truth and love And celebration of that freedom is now. My brothers and sisters, you get to be free. You get to heal yourself. I'm sharing my story so that you feel safe enough to share yours. That's all. I'm sharing my story, parts of it, so you feel safe to share yours. And start with parts of it. Whew. I didn't know I was going to get on here and let it rip. I don't ever really know what I'm going to talk about. I just know the topic and then I just go and here we are. I don't even know how long I've been recording. But thank you for listening. Brothers, I lead men's retreats. Come. Stop the excuse of money or time. Come. Come. You have sick days for a reason. Take them. If you're too afraid to take sick days at your own work, as a former employer, you get to free yourself and be the hero. You get to be the most powerful person in your life. And surround yourself with other powerful people who show love, not judgment. Compassion, not opinion. And freedom and not bondage. Thank you for watching. My name's Lucas Mack. You can find me at lucasmack.com. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. Follow, subscribe, join the conversation. Send me a message. How did this land for you? Share, open up. I've had a lot of women, my wife and I have had a lot of women reach out talking about their husbands struggling. Guess what, men? You get to reach out. You get to reach out. I'm here. Let's go. This is the Vulnerable Hero Podcast, where I define vulnerability as having the courage to experience love in its purest form. I'm Lucas Mack, and I'll talk to you on the next episode.